She fled an arranged marriage and found herself in a mysterious billionaire's car. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The wedding dress felt heavier by the second. Layers of white fabric, once admired for their intricate embroidery, now clung to Grace Whittaker's body like a trap designed to restrain her, not to honor her. Inside the small back room of the church, windowless, overheated, with a cracked mirror and damp walls, she stared at herself and barely recognized the woman in the reflection. Her brown eyes, once bright and curious, were dull and worn, defeated by weeks of muffled arguments, slaps masked by apologies, and sleepless nights spent realizing she was being handed over like a transaction. She couldn't pretend it was just a rough patch. It wasn't. Deep down, she had known that ever since the first shove, the first embarrassed excuse Preston muttered while handing her an expensive bouquet, as if roses could erase the fear he himself had planted in her. Outside, the door, her mother's voice sliced through the stillness. "Grace, it's almost time, don't be foolish." Foolish. That was what they called her will to be free. Susan Whittaker spoke as someone completing a duty, not blessing her daughter. She echoed the words she'd learned over the years. Marriage meant stability. Preston was reliable, and Grace needed to think about the family. But Susan had never known love, only endurance next to a man. That's what she expected of her daughter too, endurance and obedience. But something else had begun to grow inside Grace, something louder than fear, something more urgent than duty. A scream buried too long, a cry for help, and this time she wasn't going to swallow it. The bruise under her makeup, still tender to the touch, throbbed as a bitter reminder. An engagement gift, a punch disguised as protection. The final straw after months of control, jealousy dressed up as concern. This wasn't a marriage, it was a sentence. She had to leave, and she knew no one would open that door for her. From the small room's narrow window, a side alley offered her only chance. 2 meters down, nothing despair couldn't conquer. She slipped off her heels, tossed them through the opening, and with both hands braced on the ledge, her heart pounding. Like a drum, she climbed up. The dress made movement clumsy, but she didn't hesitate. She jumped, landed barefoot on rough concrete, skin scraping on impact. It hurt, but not as much as what awaited if she turned back. And she wouldn't. She ran through the back alleys of Napa Valley like a fugitive, her veil snagged on a thorny bush, abandoned without regret. Every step was a gamble. Every unfamiliar face could belong to someone Preston had sent after her. But she kept going. Scared, yes, but more afraid of staying than of fleeing. Her friend had followed the plan. Camille left a prepaid phone in the mailbox of a gas station on the main avenue, just as they had arranged. That was the pickup point. Grace was supposed to request a ride and go anywhere far enough to vanish. She typed in a destination, a mall across the bay in San Francisco, her fingers trembling. The phone nearly slipped from her hand. 2 minutes until the car arrived. Just enough time for the world to collapse. Pressed against the gas station wall, her breathing shallow, her dress stained and hair slipping loose from its pins, Grace tried to stay upright. Then a black sedan pulled up right in front of her. She didn't check the plate, didn't confirm the make. She flung open the back door and dove inside. "Please, just drive." That's all she managed before yanking the door shut. The blast of cold air from the AC hit her flushed skin. Her breaths came quick, shallow. Then she looked up, and her stomach dropped. The man behind the wheel wasn't a rideshare driver. He wore a tailored suit, a luxury watch, expensive sunglasses resting on his head. He held a sleek smartphone and turned slowly to face her. "Mom, I think you've got the wrong car," he said, voice calm and deep, a startling contrast to the chaos in her chest. Her heart seized. This wasn't her ride. She was in the wrong car. Her perfect escape had just become a mistake. She reached for the door handle, ready to bolt, when shouting echoed from around the corner. 3 men, one of them leading Preston's father, the face she feared most. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't know who you are, but if you have even an ounce of kindness in you, drive. Now." The man looked at her. Through the rearview mirror, her face was flushed and stained with tears and makeup. Her dress was torn, her hair a mess. But something in her eyes told the truth. Something desperate and real. He didn't ask questions. He hit the gas. The tires screeched as the car lunged forward, leaving behind a swirl of dust and confusion. Silence filled the car. For minutes, there was no sound but the engine and her soft, broken sobs. Grace crumbled, shoulders shaking as tears streamed freely, washing over her fear-streaked skin. "Thank you," she murmured, voice fading. The man said nothing. He kept his gaze on the road, driving with purpose, like he knew exactly where to take her. And in that moment, Grace realized she had no idea where she was going, but she knew without a single doubt what she was running from. And for now, that was enough. The city outside the window looked nothing like the one she'd left behind. The low buildings and uneven cobblestone streets of Napa Valley had been replaced by wide boulevards, glass-fronted buildings, corner cafes with striped awnings, and polished storefronts straight out of a luxury magazine. In the backseat of the car, Grace Whittaker clasped her hands tightly in her lap, trying to fix her gaze on anything that wouldn't betray the panic still crawling beneath her skin. The wedding dress, soaked in sweat and streaked with dust, clung to her body like a cruel reminder of what she had just escaped. Elliot Hayes drove with smooth precision, maneuvering through traffic and stopping at lights as if guided by instinct alone. He hadn't asked for her name. He hadn't demanded explanations. All he had done was keep driving. And oddly enough, that was exactly what Grace needed. Not questions, just movement. When the car pulled into the underground garage of a modern building perched on a San Francisco hillside overlooking the bay, Grace didn't have the courage to ask where they were. The place had 8 sleek floors, its facade a blend of glass and clean architectural lines. Inside the private elevator that took them straight to the penthouse, she remained silent, trying to keep the weight of the last few hours from crushing her all at once. The apartment was spacious and bathed in light, with floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Pacific in vibrant blue. It looked like a page torn from an interior design catalog. Minimalist furniture, neutral colors, sunlight, pouring in through every opening. Grace froze at the entrance, unsure how to exist in a space like that. Elliot calmly removed his blazer and gestured down the hallway. "There's a guest bathroom, second door on the right. Clean towels are in the cabinet. I'll find something you can wear." His voice was firm but not cold, and when she didn't move, he added, "You're safe here, but you need to take a moment for yourself." Grace stepped into the bathroom wordlessly. The mirror reflected the mess she'd become. A face streaked with grime and smeared makeup, hair half loose, and that dress, torn and filthy, completely out of place in such an immaculate room. Hot water streamed over her like a sudden downpour, washing her skin with urgency. But it wasn't just about getting clean. She was trying to erase it all. The bruises, the shouting, the broken promises. On the white marble floor, the wedding dress lay like an exorcised ghost. She cried quietly, not out of weakness, but because her body couldn't contain the shock anymore. When she emerged, a change of clothes was waiting on the guest bed. Sweatpants, an oversized t-shirt, and a pair of house slippers. No perfumes, no extras, just softness and comfort. On the nightstand, a glass of juice and a sandwich wrapped in a white napkin. And that small, unexpected kindness nearly brought her to tears all over again. Later, curled into the corner of the sofa in that expansive living room with the ocean spread out before her, Grace saw Elliot again, no longer in his business attire, Black t-shirt, dark jeans, barefoot. He moved through the space with a tablet in hand, absorbed in some work detail, not the least bit awkward about her presence. When he noticed her, he gave a small nod. "Feeling any better?" She nodded, back faintly, still without finding her voice. "May I ask your name now?" His tone was gentle, his smile cautious, as if not wanting to startle her. "Grace," she said quietly. "Grace Whitaker." He paused, almost like he was storing the name, then extended his hand, not demanding, just steady. "Elliot Hayes." The sound of his name seemed to settle between them, not heavy, but real. A tangible thread woven between two strangers, tied together by the most improbable of collisions. That night, Grace slept. Really slept. A deep, uninterrupted sleep that she hadn't experienced in weeks. Only the distant echoes of a fading dream broke the silence. When she opened her eyes the next morning, the sky was cloudless, and the ocean shimmered in a blue, so rich it looked unreal. She found Elliot on the balcony, already working, a mug of coffee in one hand, his eyes on the screen in front of him. "Good morning," she said, barely above a whisper. He greeted her like it was the most natural thing in the world, offering her a second mug from the small tray beside him. And just like that, reality struck her all over again. Preston, her mother, the expectations, the community, everything she had left behind with one window jump. I should leave," she said, voice tight in her chest. "I've taken enough of your kindness." He looked at her, calm but direct. "And where would you go?" The question was simple, but sharp. She didn't have an answer. She had friends, sure, but they all knew Preston. They all knew the Bellamy name, and what came with it. There was no safety unless she vanished completely. "Did you look me up?" she asked, hesitant. Elliot slowly lowered the tablet. "I only confirmed what I already suspected. Your name is all over the news, but the headlines don't show what I saw in your face." She turned away, her throat tightening. "It's not safe for you to keep me here." He rose, walked over, and placed his mug on the table. "You think I'm afraid of Preston Bellamy?" There was something in his voice that didn't ask for validation. It simply was. And then, softer, steadier. "I've known men like him, maybe more than you realize." The next few days unfolded like a long pause, a breath held between two lives neither of them dared define. Grace Whitaker remained in Elliot Hayes' apartment, occupying one of the guest rooms, rarely leaving, often observing. From the balcony, the skyline of San Francisco looked like it belonged to someone else's life, a life where she wasn't about to marry a man who had hurt her more times than she could remember, a life where she didn't have to calculate every word before speaking or hide bruises beneath makeup. Elliot respected her space. He left early for meetings and came home in the late afternoon, carrying grocery bags or casually dropping a book on the table as if to say, "If you want it, it's here." He never asked about the wedding, the escape, or her past, and somehow it was that absence of pressure that made Grace trust him a little more each day. She used the quiet time to rearrange her thoughts, trying to figure out if it was even possible to rebuild anything from the wreckage. She spent hours by the bookshelf, flipping through pages she rarely finished, just trying to keep her mind from spiraling. At night, when silence wrapped around the apartment and the city lights shimmered, below her throat would tighten. Preston was far away physically, but not in memory. The yelling, the threats, the grip of his hands whenever his temper flared came back in waves. And no matter how secure Elliot's apartment felt, Grace knew one wrong move could be enough for Preston to find her. Men like him didn't leave doors ajar, they kicked them down. That's what she feared most, that this peace was nothing more than a short break before another storm. On the third night, Grace found Elliot standing on the balcony, looking out at the dark ocean. A light rain had begun to fall, and the wind pulled at his thin t-shirt. She stopped a few steps behind him, unsure. "Why are you helping me?" The question left her mouth before she even realized it. He didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't have one, but because he seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "My sister died 3 years ago. Her husband killed her." The sentence landed like a clean cut in the air. Grace didn't reply. She just stared at him, noticing how his features seemed darker, more closed off. She smiled and said everything was fine, covered bruises with foundation, and when she finally tried to leave, it was already too late. The silence between them stretched, not awkward, but respectful, a space held for the memory he had just shared. Grace took a deep breath. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "And she meant it. I don't know what happened between you and your fiancé," Elliot continued, now turning toward her, "and I won't make you explain. But I recognize that look in your eyes, Grace. It's the same look I saw in hers." She dropped her gaze, folding her arms tightly across her chest. The rain mixed with the salt of the ocean and clung to the air around them. "You can stay here as long as you need. This place is safe. I've hired extra security. No one gets in without clearance." His voice was firm but not forceful. He was offering, not demanding. "Why?" she asked, her throat tightening. "You don't even know me." "Because I couldn't save my sister," he replied. "And because, for some reason I can't explain, you ended up in my car. And now you're here." The simplicity of his answer said more than any grand gesture could. It was enough. It was what she needed to believe, maybe for the first time, that she wasn't entirely alone anymore. 3 more days passed like a quiet truce. Grace started moving more freely around the apartment. She helped Elliot with small things, making coffee, folding a throw blanket, watering the plants on the balcony. Elliot, for his part, kept his work schedule intact, working remotely in the mornings, stepping out for meetings in the afternoon, always returning before dark. He never said where he was going, never asked her to justify her own whereabouts. That kind of freedom, so unfamiliar, so new, still felt strange to Grace. Having spent years accounting for every step, she now found herself unsure of what to do with all that space. Until one morning, brighter than the ones before, Elliot walked into the living room in casual clothes, car keys in hand. "Feel like getting out for a bit?" She looked at him, startled. Panic flickered in her eyes, and he quickly added, "It's not a public place. I just want to show you something." 2 hours later, Grace was back in the passenger seat of his black sedan. She wore sunglasses and a baseball cap, her hair pulled into a simple knot. Elliot drove in silence to a hilltop property that housed the Horizons Forward Foundation, a support and training center for women and at-risk youth. "We started with coding workshops for teenagers," he explained, his voice carrying a quiet passion she hadn't heard before. "Now we offer technical training, legal aid, exam prep, and career planning." The building was modest, 3 floors with brightly colored walls and handmade posters lining the halls. Elliot greeted every staff member and student by name. Here, he was different, lighter, more connected, and Grace, watching him move through that space, began to understand something. There was more to Elliot Hayes than the quiet man who had let her into his home. Much more. The end of the visit to the foundation left Grace with a strange feeling. She couldn't tell if it was the contrast between the lightness of that space and the weight she still carried inside, or the way Elliot moved through those hallways, not like someone above it all, but like someone who belonged there. He spoke with everyone, listened attentively, and jotted down notes in a small black notebook. When an older woman with gray hair in a bun called him Tonio, Grace blinked in surprise. He didn't correct her. He just smiled, walked over, and embraced her. "Mrs. Odette was the first person who believed in all of this," he explained, later, when they were alone. "Back then, I still thought projects like this were just good intentions." She laughed, adjusting the cap on her head. "You seem like someone who always knew what he wanted." "Not always," he replied, eyes on the ground. "But I learned quickly that when you have something to lose, you need to chase after things that matter." On the drive back, Grace kept her eyes fixed on the window. The city changed as they descended the hill, from the colorful walls and easy smiles of the foundation to San Francisco's upscale neighborhoods with restored facades, elegant boutiques, and quiet cafes. A light rain began to fall, just as Elliot turned on the radio. For a few minutes, only the weather forecast filled the car, but then a footnote in a news segment made Grace's body stiffen. "Family offers reward for information on missing bride." Fiancé Preston Bellamy expressed concern over the bride's emotional state, citing unstable behavior in recent weeks. Elliot turned off the radio immediately, but it was too late. The words had already rooted like thorns in her memory. Grace buried her face in her hands, her body on high alert. "He's hunting me," she whispered. "He always finds me. Always." Elliot parked the car at a high overlook with a view of the ocean. The rain was hitting the windows harder now, making the world outside feel distant. "Grace," he said firmly, turning to her. "Look at me." She slowly lowered her hands. Her eyes were glassy, her cheeks wet. "He has connections, Elliot. People everywhere. Even when I tried staying with my cousin, he found out." Her voice came in waves, sometimes hushed, sometimes rushed with panic. "You're not alone this time," he said. "You won't have to run anymore. I promise he won't lay a finger on you. You don't understand. I'm putting you in danger. This isn't a choice. It's just another way to fail." The strength behind her words came from somewhere deep, a place nearly void of hope. Elliot didn't respond right away. He just reached out and gently touched her arm. "Then tell me, why does he treat you that way?" And then, without a plan or filter, the words began to spill out. Grace told him everything. She explained that the marriage had been arranged from the start, but in the beginning, Preston had been charming, polite, generous, attentive. He knew exactly what to say to make her feel special, and despite everything, she fell for him. Not because she was forced to, but because of the image he so masterfully crafted. "He made me laugh. He seemed to listen. He even said I didn't have to give up sewing if I didn't want to." The emotional seduction was quick, consuming. And only later came the remarks about her clothes, the time she spent away, the friends he disapproved of, the biting jokes, the public corrections. By the time I noticed, I didn't know where my preferences ended and his demands began. The first humiliations were subtle, hard to name. Then came the shoves, the grips on her arms, the silent punishments. The slap came the night she disagreed with the wedding venue. And the next day, flowers. Always flowers. He isolated me bit by bit, and I let him, because I still believed the man I loved might come back. Elliot said nothing. He just listened, hands on the wheel, jaw clenched. When I tried to leave, he showed up at my place, smashed my sewing machines, said I was ungrateful, that I was spitting on what my family begged me to accept. Her tears were now streaming freely. 3 weeks before the wedding, he found out I'd been saving money in secret. He hit me so hard, I blacked out. When I woke up, he was crying, said he was just stressed about the wedding, that everything would change afterward, that he would change. For a moment, the only sound in the car was the rain pounding the roof. Elliot remained quiet, though the hand resting on the seat had curled into a tight fist. I realized that once we were married, it would be even worse. I'd be officially his, and no one would have the right to protect me anymore. The final sentence came in a whisper, but its weight cut through any silence. The quiet that followed was filled only by their breathing. Elliot turned toward her, gently cupping her cheek and tilting her face. "You're not going to run anymore," he said. "Not from him, and not from the life you deserve." "How can you be so sure?" she asked. "Because I already lost someone I couldn't protect, and I'm not going to make that mistake again." The intensity in his eyes made her heart race, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was something she didn't yet know how to name, something that felt safe. The next words weren't spoken. They were felt. When Grace's lips touched Elliot's, there was no rush, no doubt. The kiss was an embrace between two people exhausted from running, and who at last had found refuge. It wasn't impulsive passion, it was the need to recognize peace in another. At first tentative, the kiss deepened with a tenderness that stood in stark contrast to the violence of the storm outside. When they pulled apart, breathless, their eyes searched the quiet for air. The rain began to let up, as if the world understood it no longer needed to conceal what had formed inside. "That was," he began. "Unexpected," Grace finished, her voice low, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to run. The next morning, Grace woke up to the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the apartment. The light filtering through the sheer curtains gave the room a warm, soft glow. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was. Not just physically, but emotionally. The previous night felt like a blur of heat and rawness, between painful memories and a kiss that came without warning. She remembered Elliot's hands on her face, the gentleness of his touch, the strange sense of safety it brought. It had been unlike any kiss she'd known. There was no pressure, no urgency, no power play. And precisely because of that, the silence she found upon leaving the guest room felt even more meaningful. She found Elliot in the kitchen, calmly scrambling eggs as if nothing had happened. "Morning," she said with a faint smile. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. His eyes still on the pan, his neutral tone was a clear sign. There would be no continuation of last night's conversation. Not here, not now. Grace took the cup of coffee he handed her with a silent thank you and sat at the counter. For several minutes, the only sounds were the scraping of utensils on plates and the faint hiss of the kettle. It was strange, she thought. So much intensity in a single moment, followed by this quiet comfort. Elliot sat beside her with a tablet in hand, responding to emails, sipping coffee, multitasking with ease. He looked effortlessly composed, even in his casual wear. Grey t-shirt, dark slacks, clean-shaven, a man who always seemed to know where he stood. "I'll be at the office all day," he said. "A few things I need to sort out," she nodded, hiding her disappointment. "Of course, I'll be fine here." And she was. But for the first time since she'd arrived, Grace felt the weight of his absence. In the days that followed, a new routine took shape. Elliot left early and returned only after dark. When he did, he was polite, considerate, but distant. Nothing in his demeanor suggested regret, but there was a guardedness to him, as if he feared crossing some invisible line. Grace noticed it in the long pauses between their conversations, in the way he avoided brushing against her in the hallway, even in his choice of topics, weather, news, minor updates about the foundation. She never asked questions, never pushed. She understood what it meant to be afraid of closeness. She had lived it for too long, and she also sensed that Elliot carried old guilt. Maybe even older than the story of his sister, maybe something buried deeper in a past he rarely mentioned. Still, everything he did radiated respect, protection, and now, a quiet wall she wasn't sure how to dismantle. That wall began to crack. On a quiet Thursday evening, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine each, Grace pointed at the bookshelf. "Have you read all those?" "Most of them," Elliot replied with a quick smile. "Except for the philosophy books. Bought those in college to impress someone." She laughed, the sound light and real. Their eyes met without the usual restraint. Elliot leaned back, setting his glass on the armrest. "You know," he said, "I don't have kids, never planned to. But when I started the foundation, I met children who needed more than tutoring or food. They needed someone to truly see them. That's when I realized I could be that person. I should be." Grace watched him, taking in not just the words, but the vulnerability in his voice. It was rare for Elliot to talk about himself, and in that moment he was completely open. The next morning, he surprised her with a proposal. Over coffee, skimming through some paperwork, he asked, "Have you ever worked with young kids?" Grace looked up, intrigued. "Yes, at a community sewing workshop before the engagement. We're planning a creative program for 6 to 9-year-olds at the Institute, kind of a sewing and crafts activity. We need someone who can sew and who's patient. I thought of you." She was silent for a moment. The proposal was simple, but the meaning behind it was not. It was an invitation to step out of her role as a sheltered guest and into something real, a chance to be useful again, to reconnect with a part of herself lost under the weight of an abusive relationship. "Do you really think I could do it?" "I know you can," he said without hesitation. And in that moment, Grace believed him. On Monday, she walked through the doors of Horizons Free Futures without sunglasses or a hat. Elliot accompanied her to the entrance but didn't go in. "They know who you are. They're expecting you." Inside, children ran down the halls, clutching sheets of colored paper, while an enthusiastic team set up supplies. Grace was welcomed, with smiles, hugs, and a flurry of questions. She was introduced to the kids as the new sewing teacher. Each child seemed to carry the energy she herself had lost in recent months. By late afternoon, exhausted and fulfilled, Grace found Elliot waiting at the entrance. He stood by the car, arms crossed, a faint smile playing on his lips. He didn't say a word, but when he opened the door for her to get in, she knew. The distance between them was beginning to fade. The workshop room was spacious and bright, decorated with drawings made by the kids themselves. Tables were arranged in a semicircle, each spot neatly set with colorful fabrics, oversized buttons, bright cotton threads, and plastic blunt needles. Perfectly, safe for the small hands eager to dive into the world of sewing. Beside Grace, a foundation staffer named Olivia helped guide the group of 8 kids. "They love crafts," Olivia said with a warm smile, "and they've never seen someone so like you." Grace thanked her, still a bit shy. It was the first time since everything had fallen apart that she felt responsible for anything. But when a freckled redhead named Ellie managed to sew on a button all by herself, the room erupted in cheers. And Grace smiled, a light, genuine smile, the kind she had almost forgotten how to make. The hours flew by as she gave herself over to that room with instinctive dedication. Her mind wasn't on Preston or the escape or the nights she'd cried alone. It was focused on how to teach a simple running stitch without anyone pricking their fingers, on how to fasten 2 pieces of felt safely. Her attention to each detail wasn't out of duty. It came from something deeper, a desire to belong. When Elliot appeared at the door near the end of the morning, he stood quietly watching. She didn't notice him until she looked up to call one of the kids and saw him leaning there, smiling gently. "Mind if I steal you for 5 minutes?" he asked when she walked over. "Only if you promise not to mess up the fabric," she replied. They laughed, and for the first time their lightness together felt effortless, like something that had finally found its rhythm. Grace followed him to a small room near the cafeteria where the staff usually took breaks. Elliot closed the door gently, but didn't sit down. "I wanted to ask you something," he began, pulling his phone from his pocket. "Do you plan to stay at the apartment a while longer?" Her heart beat faster. "Why? Are you asking me to leave?" He frowned, genuinely confused. "Of course not. If you'd like, we could make your stay a bit more official. Maybe set up the room more permanently. Make it feel like your own. If you want, I can even have your name added to the intercom." Grace didn't answer right away, not because she was unsure, but because it all felt new, to be officially recognized, somewhere, to have a space with her name on it. "Are you offering me a home?" she asked finally. Elliot rubbed the back of his neck. "Not exactly. I just want you to feel free to build something here. A place where you don't have to ask permission to exist." Grace bit her lip, eyes misting. "Thank you," was all she could say. But it was enough. When she returned to the classroom, the kids were clustered around one of the tables, proudly, showing off their latest project, fabric pencil cases adorned with buttons. Some were crooked, most were messy, and every one of them was beautiful. She sat with them and picked up where they'd left off, pretending her chest wasn't full to the brim. The sense of belonging didn't just come from Elliot's words, it came from what she was stitching together in that room, thread by thread, stitch by stitch. In the days that followed, Grace showed up at the foundation every morning. In the afternoons, she organized supplies, planned new workshops, and got help from one of the older kids, Amina, a curious teen who dreamed of becoming a fashion designer. Gradually, small requests started arriving, minor alterations from the children's mothers and staff. Elliot encouraged her but kept his distance. He drove her there and back, asked how her day went, listened intently but never crossed any lines. It was just daily life now, made of shared spaces and quiet patterns. And somehow that made everything stronger, because there was no pressure, just time, just exchange. And for Grace, after everything she'd endured, that was worth more than any confession of love. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, as she sorted fabric scraps in the workshop, that Grace felt the air shift. At reception, a stir of tension caught her attention. A tall man with a facial scar and leather jacket was arguing with the guard. It only took a second for her to recognize him. Pascal Riva, one of Preston's trusted men. Her blood ran cold. Her hands trembled. She quietly slipped into the support room and closed the door. Pulling out her phone, she called Elliot. "It's one of Preston's guys, Pascal. He's here. I just heard him describing me to security." On the other end, Elliot's voice became instantly firmer. "Give me 5 minutes. I'm on my way." She hung up and sat down, struggling to breathe. Reality had caught up with her again, but this time she wasn't willing to hide alone. When Elliot arrived at the center, he entered through a side door that only administrators had access to. His jaw was tight, his steps brisk, his eyes scanning every face. He found Grace in a side office, sitting with her arms wrapped around herself, hands trembling in her lap. When she saw him, she stood at once. "Is he still here?" she asked, panic in her voice. Elliot locked the door behind him. "He's gone, but he was asking about a new woman, light skin, dark brown hair, average height. He described you perfectly. Didn't use your name, but he was fishing for clues." Grace clutched her chest, struggling to breathe. "How did he find me? No one here knows who I really am. Nothing links me to this place." Elliot took a breath before responding. "Someone must have seen us together. Maybe followed the car, maybe snapped a picture. They have resources, and now they know you're nearby." The rest of the afternoon blurred into a series of calls, security updates, and discreet instructions to the staff. Elliot stayed composed, but every move revealed the seriousness of the situation. 2 new guards were hired to monitor the area. Cameras were checked. Any suspicious activity was to be reported instantly. "This isn't paranoia, Grace. It's strategy, and I know how to play this game." He didn't go into details, but something about the firmness in his tone made everything feel possible. Back at the apartment, Grace tried to mask her tension, but it was visible in her rushed movements and the way she stared out the window at every sound. When they finally shut the penthouse door behind them, she asked, Who are these people you brought in? What kind of help is this? Elliot looked at her calmly. Nothing illegal, just strategic surveillance. I know how to handle men like Preston, and I have the means to protect you. She didn't answer right away. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. All of this, for me, she whispered. Elliot knelt in front of her so their eyes met. For us. The words came out without hesitation, and their weight landed, heavier than any declaration. For a moment, Grace felt tears rise again, but she held them back. This wasn't a time for weakness, and she wasn't that woman who had fled in desperation anymore. In the next few days, you'll keep going, to the foundation, with an escort. One of my drivers will take you. He's trained and knows not to stop for anything. She nodded, heart clenched. The security Elliot offered was real, but it was also a constant reminder that danger was still very close. And it was. On Friday morning, while Grace was setting up materials for the day's workshop, a message came. In from an unknown number, the screen lit up with an image that made the ground fall away beneath her. It was a photo of her mother, Susan, standing outside their old house in Napa Valley. The caption read, "She pays if you don't return. 48 hours. Grace's legs gave out. She sat down immediately, phone shaking in her hand. Her mother's face looked tired but unhurt. Still, the message was clear. The rules had changed. Now it wasn't just her at risk. It was the woman who, for all her faults, was still her mother. And Grace knew, no matter the resentment, she could never put Susan in danger. She didn't hesitate. She asked the driver to take her home early. She needed to think, and she knew exactly what she would do. At the apartment, the decision weighed on her like a stone. She grabbed a small suitcase, packed a few clothes, the cash she'd earned from alterations, and wrote a short note. She thanked Elliot for everything, said she had to go, that it was the only way to keep everyone safe. Her hand trembled as she added the final line, "Don't look for me." She was about to leave when she heard the lock turn. Elliot stepped in, earlier than usual. His eyes landed on the suitcase, then on her. The silence was immediate, thick with tension. "What's going on?" he asked, voice low but firm. Grace didn't answer. She just handed him the phone. Elliot read the message slowly, his jaw tightening, his gaze turning sharp. "You're not seriously considering going back?" "It's my mother." "Elliot," she said, tears forming, "what do you expect me to do?" He took a step forward, anger clear in his stance. "Anything but surrender. That's not protection. It's suicide." She looked away, trying to stay composed. "Men like Preston don't stop. If I don't go, he'll hurt whoever he can. He'll start with her." Elliot's next words hit like a punch. "Then we get her out. We protect you both. I have the means, the connections. We can handle this together." Grace looked at him shaken. "And then what? Do we hide forever? Live in fear?" He held her hands, leaning in close. "No. We live however you choose. Free, safe, with the life you deserve." The tears fell, unrestrained, and even as the storm swirled around them, that promise was the anchor she didn't know she needed. That night felt different from all the others. Grace couldn't sleep. Sitting on the couch with a blanket over her legs, she stared out at the city through the window, trying to read in the distant lights some kind of sign about what was coming next. Elliot was in the kitchen, preparing a hot drink in silence. They had already said everything that could be said that night. He had made several calls to contacts in Napa Valley, hired a private team to get Susan out of her house safely, and arranged a secure apartment with discreet surveillance. Within 24 hours, Grace's mother would be in San Francisco. "She'll see you," he had said after hanging up the last call. "She wants to see you." Grace had simply nodded. She didn't yet know how to feel about it. Susan had. spent years normalizing everything Grace had lived through, but now she was the one at risk. And Grace knew, no matter the pain she carried, she would never wish that fear on her mother. The next morning, the apartment felt off, like it was waiting for something. Elliot had left early to handle the final arrangements, while Grace stayed behind, walking from room to room, trying to fill the hours before a definitive choice. When he returned, his expression was different, lighter. It's done. She's here, safe. Grace exhaled slowly. Relief washed over her like a quiet tide. Elliot gave her space, told her she could decide when and how to see Susan, but one thing was clear: this chapter, as difficult as it was, had been closed. Now it was Grace's turn to choose what came next, and for the first time, she saw it clearly. "Elliot," she said, stopping in the hallway, "what if I wanted to do something more?" He looked at her, focused. "More like what?" "Report him. Officially." The word felt big, heavy, but it left her lips with certainty. "Not just for me, for everything." Elliot didn't hide his surprise, but he didn't try to talk her out of it. "Are you sure?" he asked calmly. Grace nodded. "For a long time I thought it wouldn't matter, that no one would believe me. But now I don't want others to go through what I did. And if they see that I spoke up, maybe they will too." He took a breath, processing the decision. "I know a lawyer, someone I trust. I can call her today," Grace agreed. And as soon as she spoke those words, something shifted inside her. A new energy, a courage that didn't come from anger but from conviction. She was tired of fear, tired of running, tired of erasing her name from places, of hiding her face, of asking for permission to exist. She wanted to be heard, to name what she had survived, and maybe stop Preston from doing it to someone else. The lawyer, Vanessa Crawford, had a firm voice and a steady gaze. She welcomed them into an office with pale walls and a window overlooking the bay, her desk neat and lined with color-coded folders. It wasn't a cold space, but it demanded seriousness. Grace began telling her story with a clarity that surprised even herself. She spoke of insults, shoves, hidden bruises, of the time she went to urgent care with a hurt wrist and lied, saying she fell down the stairs. Vanessa listened without interruption, taking notes. "Do you have medical records?" "2, one for a fractured wrist, another for rib trauma." "Any witnesses?" "A neighbor once heard yelling, and my mother, she saw things, never spoke up, but she saw." Vanessa lifted her eyes. "Would she testify?" "I think she would. After what happened, I think she sees it all differently now." "Then we have a strong case, a very strong one." In the days that followed, Grace threw herself into the process with quiet resolve. She gathered documents, wrote a detailed statement, and sat down with her mother. A tense meeting full of long pauses and painful confessions, but also something resembling real remorse. Susan didn't try to defend the past. She just held her daughter's hand and said she was there. "If you need me to speak, I will." And Grace did. She wanted everything on record. She wanted every omission to have a name. She wanted silence turned into evidence. Elliot, as always, was present, never intrusive, but always available. He fetched documents, confirmed appointments, waited outside rooms while Grace spoke to her attorney alone. And at the end of each day, back at the apartment, sharing a meal or talking about the foundation's future, Grace felt something growing inside her. Not love, not yet, but more than gratitude. At the foundation, the workshops continued. The children now gravitated toward her, always eager for her attention. Some mothers started coming around too, bringing clothes to mend, asking about opportunities, sharing stories that reminded Grace, faintly but unmistakably, of her own. She listened, not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who had survived, and that now was the point. Living, fully, with dignity, with choice. One afternoon, while she was helping little Elise sew a felt pouch, a teenage girl approached, eyes uncertain. "Miss Grace, is it true that what Mr. Bellamy did to you was wrong?" Grace's heart clenched, but she didn't hesitate. "Yes, it's true, and that's why I'm talking about it now, so no one thinks it's normal." The girl nodded and stood beside her a while, quiet. When she finally walked away, Grace knew she had done something that mattered more than any court ruling ever could. The official notice arrived at the end of the week. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday at a local court equipped to handle domestic violence cases. Vanessa Crawford explained that this wasn't the final trial, but a session to evaluate the restraining order and the formal request to open a criminal investigation. Grace listened closely. She wasn't shaking, and she didn't avoid eye contact, but her body betrayed the effort it took to remain composed. Elliot, ever present, stood by her side with a serious expression, ready to support her if needed, but careful not to take control. That morning, Grace dressed in dark slacks and a light blouse, her hair neatly tied back. Not out of vanity, it was armor. She walked to the car with steady steps, but paused before getting in. "Thank you for standing beside me, without keeping me from seeing it through," she said to Elliot. He didn't reply, he just touched her hand lightly. Then they drove off. The courthouse was smaller than Grace had expected, but the tension inside made up for its modest appearance. The hearing room had benches on either side, a judge's podium, and tables for legal counsel. Preston was already there, dark suit, clean shave, every detail polished, as if presentation could overwrite reality. He didn't look at her, he kept his eyes on his papers, feigning indifference. But Grace could feel it. Her presence disturbed him. He hadn't expected her to show. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The session began with the usual formalities. Then Vanessa presented the petition and attached documentation. The judge flipped through the papers, jotting notes in a side notebook. Then she asked to hear from the victim. Grace stood, crossed, the space to the designated seat, and took a deep breath. She spoke with a steady voice, void of aggression. She wasn't seeking revenge, only truth. She described the early days of the relationship, how she had mistaken control for care. Then she recounted the commands, the isolation from friends, the emotional manipulation. She detailed nights spent crying in the bathroom, the slaps, the shoves, the fear of falling asleep. The judge listened without interruption. When Grace finished, the judge asked for the medical records. Then she called Susan. Grace's mother entered nervously, her eyes low, but when she began speaking, her honesty startled even Grace. She admitted to pretending not to see, to making excuses, to staying silent out of fear. But now she saw what she had ignored. "My daughter could have died, and I would have been next to the man who hurt her, calling him family. Never again." Her words hit hard. Even Preston clenched his fists, but he stayed silent. The judge thanked Susan and asked her to step out before continuing the session. Preston was the last to speak. His attorney attempted to undermine the case, claiming Grace had left her family by choice, portraying her as unstable and easily manipulated. Preston remained calm until the judge questioned him directly. "Do you confirm there was a physical altercation shortly before the wedding?" He hesitated, claimed it had been a heated argument, but denied ever raising a hand. The judge then presented one of the medical photos, bruises on her face, a fractured rib. Preston looked away. His lawyer tried to argue the origin of the injuries was unproven, but it was too late. The judge made notes decisively. She confirmed the restraining order and, given the weight of evidence, ordered a criminal investigation and Preston Bellamy's immediate preventive detention for posing a danger to the victim. The room fell silent. Grace closed her eyes. Last, his name was said aloud, in public, with consequences. There was no celebration as they left the courthouse, only relief. Preston's arrest was the beginning of a long legal process, but it was a symbolic victory. Elliot stayed quiet, walking beside her to the car. Vanessa exchanged words with a colleague, collected the documents, and promised daily updates. Back at the apartment, Grace kicked off her shoes, dropped her bag in the corner, and stood in the middle of the room, taking it all in. "Is this it?" she asked. Elliot came closer. "It's the beginning. Now you get to write the rest." She nodded. But instead of retreating to her room, she walked out to the balcony. She looked at the city and thought of every time she had believed she'd never escape, never have the strength. But here she was, breathing, choosing, existing. In the days that followed, change unfolded quickly. The foundation began receiving more inquiries from women. Grace's story spread quietly, through neighborhoods, through whispers, through social media. It wasn't public, but it was heard, and that was enough. Elliot rearranged his schedule to stay in San Francisco longer, entrusting the Marseille offices to his team. The once pristine apartment became a hub of donation bags and project drafts cluttering the dining table. Grace participated in every part of it, but also carved out time for herself. She returned to sketching, began thinking about resuming her studies. Slowly, life was shifting from survival to something fuller, and for someone who had once been silenced, that was the truest mark of freedom. It was late afternoon when Grace opened the window and felt the warm breeze rolling in from the bay. San Francisco no longer felt threatening. It still held unfamiliar corners, unpredictable rhythms. But it wasn't a place she had run to. It was one she had chosen. Elliot had spent the past days focused on expanding the foundation, but even with a full schedule, he always came home at the same time. He brought dinner in reusable bags, asked how her day had been, and sat with her on the living room rug, surrounded by children's artwork and scraps of fabric. Grace had already said she didn't want to go back to her old workshop. Now she wanted to build something within the association itself. Her own project, with her name on it. Elliot respected that. He watched her with quiet admiration, never making promises, but never limiting her dreams either. The way he looked at her wasn't as if he saw fragility. It was as if he saw strength. That night, they sat at the kitchen table. They ate a simple pasta, shared a bottle of wine, and let the conversation flow without urgency. Elliot talked about renovating a nearby space that would become a workroom for mothers while their children were in activities. Grace suggested attaching a small playroom. He agreed. "You think of everything," he said, smiling. She returned the smile. "That's because now I can think. Before, I was just reacting." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was a quiet acknowledgement of change. Her entire life had been about responding to what others imposed. Now she was planning, choosing, and it showed in every detail, from her wardrobe to her weekly calendar. When dinner was over, Elliot began clearing the table but stopped when he saw her standing by the window, hands resting on the ledge, eyes far away. He walked over quietly. She turned slowly, as if sensing his presence. There was no doubt in her gaze, only calm. She stepped forward and touched his face gently, fingers brushing along his skin. The gesture asked for nothing. It simply touched. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if that single caress was enough. And it was. When he looked at her again, he found in her a silent certainty that needed no words. Elliot took her hand firmly. He didn't speak. He gently pulled her by the waist and led her to the bedroom. There was no urgency, no scripted lines, just two people walking side by side into the space they now shared. A room still with unpacked boxes, a stack of books on the dresser, curtains she had chosen, and above the headboard, a drawing made by the kids. In the middle of that soft disarray, there was comfort, and there was desire. The touch between them unfolded naturally. Elliot looked at her with the patience of someone who understood time was essential, and Grace responded with the openness of someone who had known fear, but now longed to experience something else, something gentler, deeper, more real. The kiss was unhurried. Her body found space against his with the ease of someone who finally felt safe. He undressed her carefully, reading every expression. She didn't look away, and when he whispered if she was okay, she answered with a soft nod and a kiss that said yes without words. The night continued uninterrupted. It was physical, yes, but also emotional. The connection built itself in every detail. Fingers intertwined, shared glances, the way their bodies moved together with instinct and trust. Afterward, they stayed there, lying side by side, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Elliot ran his fingers through her hair in slow strokes. Grace wasn't asleep, but she didn't want to speak. She just wanted to feel. In the morning, she woke with the sun slipping through the curtain's edges. She reached out and felt his skin, warm. A simple touch, but one full of meaning. Elliot was still asleep, breathing steadily. She smiled to herself before slipping out of bed, pulling on one of his shirts and heading to the kitchen to make coffee. She no longer felt like a guest. That space, with its smells, its sounds, and its shared routines, was hers too. She didn't ask permission to open cupboards or hesitate before setting the table. She was home. In the months that followed, life took shape. Grace refiled her documents, resumed the academic process for credential validation, and began teaching creative sewing at the foundation, also overseeing the new community workshop. Susan returned to Napa, but called frequently. There were still wounds, but the bond was slowly rebuilding. Elliot organized a new children's wing at the foundation and made sure Grace's name appeared on the thank you plaque at the entrance. When she saw it, she paused for several seconds. It wasn't just about recognition. It was about seeing her name tied to something good, real, and lasting. It was about no longer being a shadow in someone else's life, but becoming part of the structure. The house where everything had begun with fear and uncertainty was now her permanent address. Her name was on the mailbox, the buzzer, and the foundation's records. Questions still came, yes, but now she knew where to find her footing, and she knew she didn't have to face anything alone. One Sunday afternoon, as she was picking up toys after a workshop, Grace stopped by the window. Elliot came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and murmured something about the smell of fresh bread from the street. She laughed, then turned to him, rested her forehead on his, and said, "You found me when I needed it most, and you welcomed me in a way I still don't know how to explain." He answered with a quiet kiss, and in that kiss was everything words could never fully say. The end. And what did you think of this story? Leave a like and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another emotional journey like this one. See you next time.